It's budget time. Officially, it's called the 2024 to 2028 Financial and Corporate Business Plan. But today on Penticton, we're going to keep it simple and call it the budget. Now, we put the call out to residents to submit questions, things they wanted to know about the budget, how it's put together, why certain things are in, why some things are not in, what they think of the proposed budget, and we heard back. Welcome. I'm Shane Mills along with Joanne Klebb, and today on Penticton we're joined by Angela Campbell, the Director of Finance and Administration, and by Anthony Haddad, a familiar voice here on Penticton, but now settling into his new role as City Manager. So welcome to you both and congratulations, Anthony.
Thank you, Shane. Great to be here.
Now, before we dive into the questions from the public, Anthony, I'm hoping you can walk us through how the budget is informed by Council's priority. There's 4 of them, and I think it's important for people to understand how the two are connected.
Yeah, good question to get things going. I think we're in the second year now of a council term, and they've set their 4 priorities early on, shortly after they got elected, around safe and resiliency, vibrancy and connected, livable and accessible, and organizational excellence. So those 4 priorities are the cornerstone of how we build our budget, and they reflect the needs of the community, the issues that council heard through the election process, and ultimately resulted in the priorities that they set for our community and the 4-year term that they're leading the community through. So the budget that we put together, and Angela will probably speak to this a little bit later on. It's a pretty in-depth process that we go through to bring forward initiatives and priorities and really make sure they align with what council have heard from the community and the direction council provide us through the strategic priorities. So the process to put the budget together aligns with those pieces. It's also important to recognize that the level of service that we have as an organization needs to respond to those priorities as well. And as we build the budget and build our departments and create new opportunities to respond to the needs of our community, they're the pieces that help us put the budget together to best reflect what our community need, the priorities of council, and where our city's going.
Right. Now, Angela, it's a draft budget, and I think everyone, they see the headlines and then they worry, but this is a proposal that staff has put together to present to council, and they'll debate that later this month. But can you walk us sort of through how you put this, because you have the binder in front of you, and it's about 3 or 4 inches thick, so it's a very thick document that you guys put together.
Yeah, that's correct. And Anthony mentioned it earlier. It is quite a comprehensive process to put together a budget of this size. So on the operating side, we actually start that process in July. It starts with departments putting together their budgets. They vet through it, go through it in a lot of detail, the services, as Anthony mentioned, the council priorities, how that all ties together. They submit those through to the finance department. The finance department then goes through those budgets as well, looking through them, making sure they make sense, making sure they tie back properly. Once that's completed, we go through a rigorous review process internally with senior staff as well, looking through everything, looking for opportunities for revenue generation, for reductions, for efficiencies, to bring those numbers all together to find the best balance of needs of the community and taxation revenue and pull it all together. So it takes us a long time to get to this point to bring a draft budget forward to council.
Yeah, and we actually did it twice this year.
That's right. It was a really exciting year. We've done budget 2 times. So we started early last year as well and took it to council in March.
I guess, so one of the terms that always comes up is the general operating fund and then capital budget. And I don't know that people always understand the difference. And it's an important difference because it always comes up when we're talking about capital projects and potential tax increases. Can you sort of just explain the difference and why that difference is important for people to understand?
Sure, and that's a really great question. And there's a big difference between capital and operating budgets, and it's important because they're funded differently. So we often hear things like, can't we take money from that capital project and use it for things like RCMP or bylaw? And the simple answer to that is generally no. Capital sources of funding can't be used for operating purposes. They have rules around them, either by bylaw or some other legislation, or they're agreements that tell us how we have to use that money. So if a capital project is cancelled, that money can't go towards a reduction in taxes. It needs to be used to fund another capital project.
Right, and we are very good at accessing other levels of government for funding. And so they're very particular about where their money goes.
Exactly. We try to seek as many grant opportunities and things like that to offset costs. And then another way that capital differs from operating is that capital projects are our long-term investments like equipment, structures, roads. The capital budget is used to renew, create, or grow existing assets. On the other hand, the operating budget covers the day-to-day expenses of those things like wages, maintenance, and utilities. So having said that, changing a capital budget won't impact the tax rate for the year, but it could impact an operational cost. So for example, the new lighting at Riverside Park, that will have associated utility costs like labor, things to make sure they're properly maintained. Adding more lights to the project would mean that there could be an increased operational cost. Conversely, if that project was scaled back, operational costs could reduce. So they are interrelated, but completely different.
Okay.
Well, and this is really the education side of things. Like with each budget, we try and just keep peeling back the onion and help the community understand some of the complexities. And so once they understand a little more about how things work, it makes it a little easier to digest what's being proposed. So.
Well, I know Angela will correct me if I'm wrong, but the lights at Riverside Park are a great example. That is coming from funds that the provincial government provided to us.
That's correct.
So if you don't use it on the capital, you got to use it somewhere else. You can't the province has said you can't take that money and just, use it to pay down your deficit or whatever it is. So those are restrictions imposed on us.
That's right. When we got that money, we got a letter that detailed how it had to be spent and what types of projects it could be spent on.
Now, the first question people always ask at budget time is, what's the tax increase? So we're just going to get it out of the way. The proposed is an 8.7% increase. But I think it's really important to talk about how we got there. And it actually doesn't start this year. It's been about a 3-year start to get here because I'm talking about the deferral. And last year was year one of the deferral. But Angela or Anthony, either of you sort of explain how we got to the deferral and where we're at with it in this budget cycle.
I'll maybe set the scene and let Angela go into the details. I think there's been a significant investment in public safety over the last 4 or 5 years. The previous council invested significantly in RCMP, bylaw, community safety officer program, and our fire services area, really responding to the critical needs of the community were asking to be responded to on a daily basis. So that component back in 2020-21 was significant component of the budget back then, and we're in the process of now paying for it. And I'll let Angela explain how that happens.
Sure, thanks. So of that 8.7% tax increase that you mentioned, about 6% of that is dealing with the remainder of the 2022 deferral. And that's a really important piece of the budget. And I appreciate the opportunity to just remind everyone of the impacts of the decisions that were made in the 2022 budget deliberations. So during those deliberations, Council approved a deferral of 7% of taxation into future years with the one-time use of the COVID-19 Restart Grant. Those costs were for 7 RCMP officers between 2021 and 2022, expanding the bylaw enforcement hours, adding a fire training officer, and adding a firefighter every year for 4 years. In addition to that, when Council was setting that tax rate in 2022, they approved a further deferral of 3% of taxation into future years. And that was really just to help the community deal with the impacts we were seeing of COVID. They were trying to help the community out by deferring that even further. So we had a 10% deferral in 2022, and that was intended to be spread over the next 3 years, 2023 to 2025. This budget contemplates building the remainder of that deferral into the 8.7%. So without that deferral, we'd actually be looking at more like a 3% tax increase for the year.
Right. So last year was year one. That was 3%. Now you're saying, let's get it over with. Let's combine years 2 and 3, and we'll have more flexibility, more ability to fund or do different things. Council will have different choices they can make next year, is what you're proposing. I think that's important that people remember. This is what you're proposing, and now council will decide what they want to do.
That's correct. Council could still defer a portion of that into 2025 if they wish. They could do the full 3.3% that's remaining, or they could do a portion of it. They could do 1%, 2%, 0.5%. Really what we're focused on is advancing council's priorities and being fiscally sustainable, but council can decide what's best for the community when they deliberate.
Now, Joanne, we've had healthy budget engagement. We actually started, I think, even earlier than we normally do this year. Have people been providing a lot of feedback on the deferral?
Yeah, well, and just before I jump into that, I do think it's hard for them to relate to a percentage. So an 8.7% increase works out to about $175 per year for the average annual property assessment. So that's a bit easier for people to wrap their heads around other than the percentage. But yeah, definitely through the engagement process, the big question facing council this year is, do they include the full amount of the deferral in this budget, or do they continue to phase it out? So that was something that we asked the community to find out what they thought, what their preferences were. And so the results are starting to roll in, and they're pretty interesting. And what I've noticed is that about 40% of people are all in, roll it in, rip that Band-Aid off, let's get it over with. Another 40% are, no way, don't do it, this is the worst idea ever. And then the remaining 20% are unsure. So there's some really great insights in there, but ultimately it's really going to fall to council to decide how to proceed here.
All right. Now, for the first time, I think we've done it this way on Penn Talks, and we're going to go to questions from the public. Now, some of them, there were a lot of topics that were similar, so we're just kind of bundling them together. And Anthony, here's a pair that I think tie together nicely for you. We have talked about the investments we've made previously with more police officers, more firefighters, more community safety officers. There are no increases in this year's budget, but there is a new position for Director of Public Safety and Partnerships. So people are asking, why are we hiring a civilian, in essence, and not more boots on the ground, as people have asked?
No, a great question, and we've had the chance to have a lot of discussion through the budget open house and with the community around this topic. As I mentioned earlier, we've invested in public safety over the last 5 years. We've seen a 45% increase in bylaw and in 45% increase in RCMP and fire, and over 350% increase in bylaw over the last 5 or 6 years, which has been a significant investment where those new roles have come in, and they're providing some significant success out in the community dealing with the public safety issues, the social issues that we're dealing with as a city. So we're taking a bit of pause on that investment, recognizing that there's been some big investments made on those areas, making sure that they've been the right investments. They're doing great work. They're building great partnerships in the community, and we're seeing some success. The public safety partnership role that we're bringing forward, public safety and partnerships, is a new role that's really intended to help consolidate a lot of the work that's been done over the last year and start to reshape our organization to better reflect the priorities that council have set around public safety and housing. The public safety director is intended to be responsible for our social development, bylaw services, and community safety departments, and also play a key role in the partnership piece within our community, but also be that personal representative of the organization at a provincial level and at a federal level, because we know those three levels of government with us as local government play a really key role in dealing with those public safety issues. So that role, when we've got that in place, should it be supported through the budget process, will play a really key role around the senior leadership table and drive a lot of the positive work that's been, or continue a lot of the positive work that's been done, but really start to shape where we need to go as a city internally and with our partners. What that organizational change does as well within our development services team, and that's where social development and bylaw services sat for the last few years. Done a great job, but when we look at the council priority around livability and accessibility and how we can support the growing housing needs of our city, our development services team can now better focus on the needs of housing, the development industry, and bringing along more housing that is ultimately tied to public safety and all of these issues that we're dealing with as well. So the structure of our organization is going to allow us to better reflect or better deal with the issues that are out in the community, and the public safety partnership role is a key one that we've looked at for a couple of years now, and now confident that we're in a position to bring that forward.
Yeah, and from what I've heard from the community, this just makes sense. You know, for the past 3-4 years, every single survey, every open house, every online engagement, what we've heard from the community, first and foremost, is safety is our priority. So how can the city focus on safety if your efforts are spread between managing our facilities and our rec programs or our parks? So it really makes sense that we have a dedicated role focused on the community's number one concern.
And we've had this role, again, as I said earlier, we identified it a while back, but we've got very confident RCMP leadership, fire leadership, and bylaw leadership over the years. And again, what this is going to do is make sure those departments are working closely together, align, look for different partnerships, different, I think, really interesting opportunities to work differently as a community into the future. And it's a role that we're seeing pop up across the province because of the public safety concerns that are exist across British Columbia.
I think what you're talking about leads into sort of the other question we got very frequently, sort of on the same topic, but it's the flip side of that, which is you can't arrest your way out of these problems, and that there are societal challenges that we're trying to deal with. And I know there are other communities that have similar positions, but this one has a unique name. It's public safety and partnerships. Yeah. So, and I know the city's been working on a social framework. So what are some of the things that the city's doing, even if they're just sort of being that connective tissue to help deal with sort of those societal issues so the police maybe don't see as many people, have to deal with as many people? For
sure. And first of all, RCMP, our bylaw community safety officer program, they deal with some incredibly difficult social issues out in the community that interior health, we've been pulling them to the table to help support those initiatives through CAR 40 program, and that massive investment. Our council lobbied very hard over the last couple of years to get that program in place, and it's just about to get up and running. Within our public safety role, the social development piece, as you mentioned, has been, I think, a pretty impressive investment that the city's made over the last 3 or 4 years. And the connections that the social development department have with the nonprofit organizations, social services in the community, really feed back to our bylaw team that are out in the field and the RCMP that are out in the field. And when they're dealing with challenging mental health issues within the community, we've got people at the table that can better support those individuals in distress, as opposed to RCMP having to be called to those in the fire department, for example. So it's a bit of a bridge to the significant issues. Through the Public Safety Resource Review we did a couple of years back, we identified a significant amount of calls to RCMP, to bylaw, because of mental health issues, which takes them away from proactive policing efforts. And that social piece is going to be even more critical to invest in the future. And aligning it back to that Director of Public Safety role, reporting up through that structure that we've created, or looking at create through this budget process, will only set our community up for success to continue to deal with these challenging issues that are not going away.
And part of the challenge on some of these things are we're cautious that we're not taking on added responsibility, but how do we play a role in bringing the partners together, I guess?
Correct. And we've got ultimately, the health of the community, it's a shared effort. We have interior health that focus on the public health component, mental health component, and they've increased resources around that, which has been fantastic to see over the last year or so. And the social development department really brings those teams together. The connections with our nonprofit organization, with various housing providers, are really key partnerships that are going to continue to move us forward. Within the realm of public safety, the city's created a public safety framework that tries to link the proactive enforcement piece around police and fire and bylaw, but also brings together the social piece, the housing piece, economic development, the way we design our community as well. And a piece of that that's being worked on right now is our social development framework. And through our social development department, they're leading that piece, which will, again, start to connect a lot more of the dots out in the community, bring a lot more people together, and allow for a lot more collaborative partnerships to continue to move forward.
All right, Angela's sitting here quietly. So we're going to get to some more pointed budget type questions instead of some of the philosophical questions that we were just asking Anthony. Now, we did receive a number of questions through shapeyourcitypenticton.ca and other channels. Some of them were really specific about specific initiatives. So we will get back to you and we'll post those things online. And today we're going to stay sort of more broad about the city finances. And Angela, one of the most frequent questions that we got, that potentially you got at the open house that residents were able to attend recently, was inflation's going up, food costs are high, everyone's trying to tighten their belt. What is the city doing to tighten their belt?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so earlier I mentioned the budget process and how we go through a review looking for opportunities to decrease the tax impacts to the public. So some of the ways that we did that in 2024 were looking to collect the maximum allowable property taxes through our utility assets. So that's TELUS, FortisBC, all our utility assets. Reallocating existing budget funds within ECDEV. So that's funding the new Director of Public Safety position that Anthony was just talking about. We changed the budget method for RCMP positions to better reflect projected costs. That saved us a bit of money there too. We limited the number of new department initiatives that would contribute to incremental increases. So again, tightening the belt, not as many things could be put forward this year. We also worked really hard to incorporate inflation into existing budgets where we could. So there's obviously budget line items that are impacted by contractual changes that we really can't mitigate against. That's labor costs, insurance, certain supplies. We have no control over those things. But wherever possible, we incorporated inflation into our existing budgets, keeping those 2024 budget line items at the same amount as they were in 2023. We also looked at budgets for completed projects and repurposed those funds to offset inflation costs instead. So that might include deferring projects as well as just repurposing existing funds against those inflationary impacts.
Okay.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, while that 8.7 seems like a big number, a significant portion is the deferral and dealing with costs that aren't really in our control when it comes to new initiatives. That number really isn't that big, is it?
Yeah, that's right. So of that 8.7, about 3% of that is covering inflation as well as incremental initiatives. So it's really a small portion of the budget at the end of the day.
Yeah, if someone's looking at this budget looking for some big splashy programs, or there's nothing in this budget.
Yeah, that's correct. I think the initiatives came in about 0.9% of a tax increase. So really kept that quite limited this year in order to deal with the deferral.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. One of the topics that often comes up here in Penticton is trees and the tree canopy. So the question was, is there an actual plan with a budget to increase our urban forest? And I know, Joanne, you've been very busy with your committee tree, is that?
Official community plan.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? It was really nice to see questions in there that weren't solely about, cost control, which is really important. But there are people out there that want to make sure we're staying the course on our other initiatives. And that includes advancing our climate action plan and completing our official community tree plan. So what I can tell you about the official community tree plan is we are getting ready to bring forward a draft to review with the community. And once that work is complete, we'll have initiatives that we can then advance through the future financial planning processes. But just to remind people that the funding for the development of this plan came from the 2 Billion Trees program. And along with funding the development of the plan, there's also funding available to advance the initiative. So we do have funds available for once that plan is complete.
Perfect. This is the question that I'm sure Angela knew was coming. What is in the 2024 budget for completing the South Main bike lane, and what amount is the government grant, and is that in the budget?
Yeah, so always a lot of interest around the completion of the Lake to Lake bike route. So the last phase of that project it's a multiple year project. So we had budget line for that in 2023 as well as in 2024. So the remaining budget that's in there for 2024 is $810,000. We are continuing to seek grant opportunities. So there's nothing in the budget yet because there's no confirmed grant money, but we're continuing to seek that and looking to offset that final cost.
Good. Anthony, I think this is one for you. And it's sort of, and again, more of a general question about how the budget supports these type of things. But what are we doing for the downtown, in the downtown improvement and attracting business? And this person asked about making Penticton an all-season destination. And I know in your former job with the city, you were doing a lot of work and trying to fill those shoulder seasons in particular.
Yeah, and I think when we look at the priorities of council, that vibrant, connected piece is the initiative that provides the direction to keep moving our community forward. We recognize we've got to fix some of the issues around housing and public safety and the social issues that are in the community, but we can't stand still and lose traction with where the rest of the world is going in terms of a competitiveness as a region and a location as an event destination and all the fun things that make Penticton a fantastic place to be. So downtown specifically, that's the heart of the community. A lot of where the action happens. We created a downtown plan back in 2013, and we're about 10 years into that and starting to see some pretty incredible change start to happen in the downtown in terms of the housing densities that are starting to take shape with new projects that have just been occupied over the last couple of years. The west side of downtown in particular, around the cinema and Martin Street, Westminster, we've got the breweries, we've got a very organic type of atmosphere that's being created. And for the most, there is some existing historical businesses that have expanded and locals that have reinvested there. But our community is growing as well. We're seeing a lot of talent relocate to our community from outside the region and bring with them some pretty interesting and new business opportunities as well. So we're seeing that piece in the downtown definitely move forward with new business investment, new housing investment, and the policy work we're doing behind the scenes to drive more housing and more business investment in those areas are really key. From an event perspective, we obviously look at the entire city with new events that are attracted to the community that help support our businesses. Whether we like it or not, as a city, we're well invested in the entertainment industry, the event business, with a couple $100 million of event facilities with the event center and convention center and the arenas that we have that attract a lot of business to our community. And the goal of those facilities and the events that we have is to really look at bolstering the shoulder season. We know the summer's busy. We have fantastic events in your Ironman, Grand Fondo, and we've invested in those over the years. But from a shoulder season perspective, we've invested over the last couple of years in additional larger hockey tournaments, the CSSHL, Canadian Sports School Hockey League tournament. And in January of 2024, we're going to be hosting the second outdoor BCHL hockey event. And tied to that, we're looking at expanding different opportunities for outdoor winter activities in Gyro Park, for example. So that winter experience in Penticton, we're expanding. We've got a fantastic ski resort in Apex just down the road. So those are the pieces that we're continuing to invest in from an event perspective and have a direct benefit on the event hospitality industry and go a long way to improving this place as a great place to be all year round.
So this kind of leads you to my next question, which is getting people to the downtown. This person wants to know what we can do or what the city's doing to encourage more use of public transit.
So our transit system's gone through a reinvigoration, a reinvigorated process to look at where the future investments in transit need to be over the next sort of 5, 10, 15, 20 years. The Transit Future Plan that our staff at the city have been working with BC Transit on and the community through some engagement over the last year or two has identified the need to continue to invest in transit, continue to look at increasing frequencies, especially along the main corridors, the spines of the community, to get people in and out of the downtown to key employment areas in the city as well. And that investment's going to continue on to the future. So transit's a key component for our community. We're a very accessible community from lake to lake. It's only a 5-minute drive. It's probably a half an hour, 40-minute walk from lake to lake. But the transit system, it's an affordable way of getting around the community. We're looking at increasing the frequencies along those key corridors and then connecting the neighborhoods on the east and western sides of the city as well through the future planning work. So some more investments coming up, a big investment in the planning for that future. And as I said earlier, we are growing a lot faster than we have in the past as a community. So the demand for transit is only going to increase over the next few years.
And we've been experimenting, correct me if I'm wrong, Joanne, around special events. offering free transit, offering like shuttle service in essence on like the weekend where you had the Scottish Festival at one place and something else down at Okanagan Lake Park. So there's some experimenting going on to see how we can attract people. So that's positive.
Yeah, definitely. Our team has worked with BC Transit to offer free transit for major events, and we have some more exciting opportunities that are coming up that we'll be announcing shortly.
Which just made me think, one of the things with the downtown is, what are we calling Magic on Main Street.
That's
so
right.
when Santa comes, the light up will not just be a gyro park, it'll be the downtown. So that should be pretty cool when we see that.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting to see some of the events that are coming up with the BCHL and then with the Magic on Main Street. And I've been here 17 years now, and I remember when, Penticton closed up shop in the winter. It's not like that anymore. No, there's lots of exciting stuff to do year round and great shops to visit. So yeah, it's really exciting to see that vibrancy creep into the shoulder seasons.
And I will say we don't do that on our own. We have fantastic partners in the downtown Penticton business improvement area that take the lead on a lot of those initiatives. We obviously have a lot of great volunteer organizations in the community that put on these events. So we're incredibly lucky to have those partners that help and are continuing to help make this city even better and better.
Okay, Angela, another numbers question. The $900,000 labeled as inflation, this person says, should be reviewed and reduce costs with exception of policing, fire department, and community safety in this budget. I think I know why that's not going to happen, but I'll let you explain.
Sure, and that's a really interesting comment, and I think something a lot of people don't really factor in is that of that 900,000, which seems like a really high number, when you break it down into the smaller components, you can really understand how inflation impacts the city maybe differently than it does individual people. So the contractual increase for our RCMP contract alone is $600,000, and that doesn't include any new members. That's just paying for the existing 57 members that we already have authorized. And on top of that, we've got contractual obligations for our 3 collective agreements. And then inflation on things like insurance and fuel and supplies, like I mentioned earlier, which we really have very little control over. So when you look at our general budget, we actually had closer to $2 million of inflationary impacts. That's what we identified when we went through the budget process. And earlier I spoke about how we reduce that, how we try to mitigate those impacts. And we take all of the revenue generating items that we find through that process and we apply that against inflation in order to reduce that to the lowest amount possible.
Okay. Anyone want to add on that? No? Okay, here's one.
Extend the conversation on inflation?
The excitement of all the budget talk.
We see it again in through the event industry, whether it's the cost of chicken or soft drinks and alcohol, all those costs are increasing, and there's a limit upon which we can pass those costs on to the consumer as well. So they're some of the really challenging things from our perspective that we try and balance on a daily basis.
And I would think at the community center, there's chemicals and things that you need.
Absolutely.
And you don't get to, it's not a barter system.
Exactly. And the challenges over the last couple of years with the with road closures and a lot of those resources that we get come from other cities as well. So when you have delays, then there's extra costs and you got to look somewhere else. So every business deals with challenges and we're no different as a city.
Okay. Another sort of numbers question. This person's talking about in the budget, it says, and I'll let you comment on this, Angela. It says new hires of 9. And then all of these should be funded from current 2023 budget and not from increased spending in 2024. So.
Yeah, that's a really great question and something that I certainly heard at the open house as well from the public. So the 9 positions that are being proposed don't all impact the budget through taxation, actually. A number of them are funded internally, either through cost savings or through utilizing existing contract budgets to cover employees. We often seek the most efficient way to deliver service. So sometimes that's through contractors and sometimes that's converting it to an FTE or an employee when it becomes more cost effective for us to bring it in-house. So it's another way that we seek to use our funding the most efficient way possible. So there's also positions being proposed that are funded through our capital program. So again, not impacting taxation, and ones that we're repurposing relief funds into permanent positions. So at the end of the day, of those 9 positions, very few of them have any impact on that 8.7%.
I guess what I'm always struck by is I think Penticton residents are very rightfully very proud of the service that they receive. They all like the parks and how the parks are maintained. They like the way the roads are maintained. They like the flowers, all the amenities that we have for a relatively small community. We have a lot of amenities, and we're growing at close to 2% a year. If you're going to maintain those services, the city has to grow a bit with it.
Absolutely, and I think we have more pressure on our parks. That has more demand on the services to look after our parks. For example, on more events that come to the city. As I said, we're increasing at approximately 1.5 to 1.8% a year in terms of our population growth. If we continue on with that, we're looking at projecting another 20,000 people move into our city over the next 25, 30 years. So they're all the things that we need to plan for. We obviously need to make sure that we're running an efficient operation, but deliver a service that the community expect. And we've got a lot of new residents that turn up to our community on an annual basis, and there's different expectations that they bring to the community as well. So it's balancing the historical needs, but also I think really making sure that we are planning for the future with the resources that we have as an organization and delivering on the services that our community expect.
I think that's an important point, too, is of those positions, we're not really enhancing any city services. We're trying to maintain the existing service level that the public is expecting from us. And I think we've seen through our citizen surveys and our engagement program, the citizens of Penticton do not want to see service level reductions. They'd like to see us either continue on with the levels that we have or do even more than we do now.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that, and was going to jump in there with that, Angela. We did do a citizen survey in the spring, and it was consistent in that people ranked the services very high. Of the 31 we evaluated, 28 were in the top quartile. And when asked how people want to continue to fund these services or address the rising costs, they consistently want to see us look at ways we can encourage growth to, increase the tax base to fund them. And at the bottom of the list is really reducing service levels. So that's definitely reflected in this budget.
So that's it for questions. As we're sitting here and we're thinking, this isn't it, folks. You still have some opportunities to comment. And council's deliberations are a little later in the month. So Shape Your City, is that the best place for people to go? Yeah, Shape Your City is really the hub of all the information. So everything we've talked about here today, you can look at the documents in full detail on Shape Your City. And so the budget deliberations are happening November 21st to 23rd, and those are going to be streamed on the website, so you can watch council go through the budget line by line. They'll hear all of these details and more and have a chance to ask their questions as they deliberate on whether or not to move this budget forward. Anthony?
I think ultimately, like every budget is about choice. And we work hard, obviously, as you heard through the work that we do as an organization to bring our budgets forward, working with council and the priorities that are set. And I think it's probably the most important decisions that council make during these budget processes, and they set the scene for the future programs and work plans on an annual basis. So really important for the community to get involved. We've had some great conversations over the last year or so, or last few months, on this budget and obviously in the past. And really looking forward to the conversation with council. It sets the community up for the following year. And as people will see through the budget process, it's also important to look out into the future as well. And that's where our sort of longer term planning is included in this budget process. So really looking forward to the process coming up over the next few weeks.
And Angela, I'm just looking at one of the handouts that have been given, and I guess sometimes people don't make the connection, but I think it is important to make that connection between the numbers in that budget come to life in how the priorities have breathed into them. And that's really what your budget is about. How do we do these things to make our priorities?
Yeah, that's correct. Council's strategic priorities really drive the budget. They drive the services that we provide the community and the actions that council wants to see staff take into the next year. So really that document, those council priorities, they guide the entire city budget and what we bring forward to council, and then they decide what it is that they want to see us do next year.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up too, because today we've talked about the numbers and tried to explain the numbers. But what you'll see happening on the streets, you should really go and check out the materials, and you can see all the range of capital projects that are proposed and other initiatives, and just how the community is going to change and evolve in 2024.
All right, I think that's it for this edition of Penn Talkton. I want to thank Angela Campbell, the city's Director of Finance and Administration. I always forget that part. And City Manager Anthony Haddad for joining us. And a big thank you to all of you who have submitted your questions. And for those that we didn't answer today on the podcast, we will put up on Shape Your City. So thank you for taking the time to be part of the budget process. For Joanne Klebb, I'm Shane Mills. We'll talk again soon.